when God's people are in exile, even when they're under pretty brutal regimes, God is faithful. God is with them. God is working out all of history. Babylon's gone, Persia's gone, ancient Greece, Rome lasted quite a long time, but the Roman Empire has gone. The Lord is sovereign over all the kings of the earth, and who is building Christ's kingdom. And so we can look forward with hope.
Hello, welcome to the Bible OverBrew with me, Rachel Redeemed, and Matt Searles. We are here to get into the books of Esther and Daniel. The BibleOverBrew.com has had some notes and questions, hopefully to help guide and steer you. And we're going to be looking, we are going to cover, the whole book of Esther, but the key chapters today officially are Daniel 1 to 7. Now, this episode probably comes with a little bit of a flag wave. There's some pretty heavy stuff, so listener discretion advised, and I think we should jump in to checking if tea is appropriately in your hand. Hooray!
Tea in hand, yep. Bible open, good and ready to go. How about yourself?
I have I think peppermint. My husband kindly made this for me, so I'm well kitted, ready to go. Are you builders as per usual? You breaking ranks?
Builders as per usual, yep. Yeah.
May we have some of the story so far?
We are, in terms of the order we've been doing things, we are in the third section of the Hebrew Bible, the writings, which a lot of them are kind of wisdom literature, poetry stuff, but actually there are a few just towards the end of this section that are more kind of history narrative, and we're into that now with Esther, Daniel, and then Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. And so these books do fit into the overall storyline, whereas Psalms, Proverbs, etc. sort of sit outside the storyline. We're now in the storyline, and actually in Esther and Daniel, well, in Esther we've got the chronologically latest book in the Old Testament. So what's the story so far? Well, way back many centuries ago when we began this podcast, we were in the Garden of Eden, God creating this beautiful world for humanity to dwell with him, a God of relationship, wanting relationship with his people, but cast out due to human sin. The story is, can humanity be brought back into the presence of God? One thing that I think will be important, particularly for Esther, is we might remember from Genesis 3, as humanity was cast out of the garden and judgment fell on them, judgment also fell on the serpent. And a verse that's been quite important as we've gone through, Genesis 3:15. God's curse on the serpent is, I will put enmity, hostility, between you, the serpent, and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, you will strike his heel. We are expecting a conflict between the offspring of the serpent, this representation of evil, so sort of those who align themselves with the serpent, Satan, and the offspring of the woman, God's godly line of people, his people. And so evil is going to be attacking God's people. Throughout the story, we've seen that, but we're also looking for, well, particularly one offspring who will crush the serpent's head. We're looking for a serpent crusher. But this conflict of Genesis 3:15, I think that's going to be important as we get to some moments in Esther. God's people go down into Egypt. They're rescued in the Exodus. They're brought into the land. They're given the temple. They're given a good king. And God's promises, really it's promises to Abraham, a people, a land, blessing, all under a good king. These promises are starting to come to fruition, but what happened was, in the land which was like a new Garden of Eden, the same thing happened again. The people sinned just as Adam and Eve had in the garden. The people were cast out to the east just as they'd been cast out to the east from the garden. That being cast out of the land is known as the exile, and we covered that in the books of Kings. Because of sin, humanity cast out of the presence of God. You see, it wasn't just about geography. It wasn't just about losing their homeland, terrible though that was. It wasn't just about all the destruction that happened, terrible though that was. Actually, the temple was destroyed and they were far from the presence of God. And Esther and Daniel both are set, well, sort of during the exile. Actually, Esther is after some of the exiles have come home. But actually what happened is not all of them made it home. And so when we come to Ezra and Nehemiah and we see people coming back to Jerusalem, we'll need to remember that not everyone made it back. This wasn't the full return. One of the reasons it wasn't the full return it should have been. And so even though Ezra and Nehemiah and various other people come back to the land, rebuild the temple, there's lots good that happens. Meanwhile, Esther and her family and a whole bunch of people are scattered through, not Babylon anymore, because part of the reason the exiles got sent home is that Babylon, where they were in exile, got conquered by the next great power, Persia, or Medo-Persia, but often just known as the Persian Empire. So Esther is set in the Persian Empire. It's massive. The Persian Empire was the biggest empire in the world to date, right from northern India, Pakistan, all the way down through into what today would be Sudan, probably then called Ethiopia, up through Turkey, I think modern day Bulgaria, into Greece. It was absolute. I mean, you just look at it, it's huge. And Esther is right at the heart of this, or there are probably a number of capitals, but in one of the capitals, and in the court of this, I think we have to say, abusive king, Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. But when we see the empire, this was such a powerful man reigning over, even the opening verses of Esther, such a huge empire. Probably Esther set just before the Battle of Thermopylae, possibly. He would go to war against Greece, and that kind of the Spartans defending with only 300 soldiers. It's kind of that's one of the moments that's maybe familiar to some people in popular culture, and films get made of it. But we're in this incredibly big, powerful empire of King Xerxes, and Esther is a foreigner, a sort of exile slave. We're focusing on one woman in this mighty empire.
I just find it a strange experience because I feel I'm quite familiar with the story. I think it's one that is taught of as Old Testament stories go in kind of Sunday school, and there's great things here, and it is, I mean, the storytelling is fantastic, and it is a gripping story, but I feel going slightly under the surface of what's going on and the actual settings, it just gets really dark really quickly. Again, it's the kind of famously the book that God isn't mentioned overtly, but you see him at every twist and turn, and it just so happens. It's interesting to see God's sovereignty and the assurance of him, even when culture has just gone so far, and we have this king who is just treating women horrendously. It starts pretty darkly, and I don't think it gets much better.
The opening paragraph, certainly in my Bible, we get all the splendor of his kingdom and all his might and pomp and ceremony, and I just wonder, even if that description, there's a little bit, it's being laid on a bit too thick. The narrator is genius. I don't think says, what a ridiculous figure. But I wonder if we're starting to get a bit of that, just so over the top. There's all this he's doing to celebrate himself. He's probably massing his, trying to build support maybe for this war he's going to wage against Greece just coming up. But then at the end of this great banquet, he summons the queen, and in order to show the peoples and princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. I mean, it's a pretty sordid desire for her to come, but she refused to come, and he gets enraged and then says, what are we going to do about this? Well, he then consults with this huge team of advisors. Together they say, I know the answer. Let's make a proclamation throughout the land that men are to be the head in the households. And it's one of the ones, if I can say that, I think it's supposed to be funny to see this seemingly big king, and some representations of him. He's often pictured as something of a giant, this godlike figure. This big man over a big empire is actually a very little man. And so I think there's satire, but so long as we realise it's satire, but to satirise an absolutely wicked, abusive man as well. And so it's not satire to trivialise, but it's one of the tools that the narrator uses to show God's derision, how he despises, I think, such behaviour. Maybe take us into chapter 2, because his treatment of Vashti in chapter 1 is not good, but actually Esther and all that happens with the harem is, again, we could read this quickly and sort of not see what's happening here.
It's an extra biblical source, but some folks have said about Vashti being required to come and wearing only the crown, and then we see him basically gathering an entire generation of probably teenage girls to deflower them every night, and then once they've been in with him, they're then sent out to the second harem after, you know, we can lean into the like, oh, there's the beauty treatments, and then you're like, yeah, and you know, these folks have been taken. You know, it looks to my eyes like trafficking. It doesn't spark. This was Esther's choice and her idea of climbing the political ladder. I think this is an absolutely horrendous story of what happens. I mean, you know, a few minutes later they're going to be plotting a genocide. So it's not like we've got, you know, these great moral upstanding figures.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, it does frustrate me quite a bit when Esther slightly gets blamed for, well, she sort of went along with this, and I think, you know, is she a morally ambiguous character at this point? I just think, oh my goodness. I think everything in the text, as well as what we know of, well, kings in general, but someone like Xerxes, I think Esther is a slave, a victim, a trafficked person, really. I'm really sad. I think misreadings of this story that slightly sort of throw Esther under the bus for what happens to her. She doesn't seem to be a sort of a you know, particularly instigating anything here. She's the one that it all happens to, and I think yeah, again, it's another reasons why we need to read this story. Firstly, read slowly so we can see the horror of what happens, but then read and see who's at fault here. We'll sort of draw applications at the end, but I do think at one level this is a picture of Xerxes, but at another level it's a picture of actually lots of human kingship, that actually the weak women are mistreated, abused, used for the king, for the leader, for the man's own gratification. By negative contrast, how much does it point to a king that we need, who actually will treasure women, will exalt them, will not use them, but serve them rather than the other way around? So lots of misunderstandings that I think could be quite harmful if we don't read carefully. But you mentioned the genocide. Take us into the next little scene.
Yeah, that we need our pink post-it notes to keep an eye on our characters, because we do have a good guy, Mordecai. So he's the uncle of Esther, who's kind of in the background, and we have the baddie Haman, and Haman really has it in for the Jews, and he basically gets this genocide announcement to be broadcast. I believe it happens just before they're supposed to celebrate Passover, and it would have gone out into the land, you know, over 3 or 4 months or so, but the people in Susa would have known right away that this was happening. And so you've got the Jews there hearing that they're going to be exterminated in about 11 months, and the perpetrator there, Haman, is kind of rubbing his hands together. Possibly he's going to steal the money to give to the king because he wants to do it, and says if the king lets him do it, he'll give him loads of money, like billions and billions of pounds, like silly money. If that figure is, you know, correct in how that all works out, is like it's dark and it's shocking, I think.
That's where Esther, who's a Jew, hasn't revealed this yet. Mordecai, her uncle, who's been looking after her, has said, don't reveal it yet. And I think probably that command, don't reveal yet that you're a Jew, probably just already has shown us there's an anti-Semitic kind of anti-Jewish flavour already. So it's probably wise for Esther not to admit that. But interestingly, then at the end of chapter 4, now she's in this exalted position, and this commander's gone out to exterminate all the Jews. He says, look, if you keep silent, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. I think we get here a trust in the sovereignty of God. Actually, God will deliver. But this is 4 verse 14. Who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And that's probably the famous verse in Esther.
Yeah.
That actually she's got this position, and I mean, through a horrible means, but she's now in this position of some power. I mean, still very limited, actually, given how Xerxes had been treating his wives. But actually, will she make the most of the position she has to speak out for her people? She starts to broach it with the king, asked to prepare a banquet, and she sort of is beautiful building the suspense. She delays what she actually wants to ask for. Haman's invited to the banquet. He's starting to get excited about being at the queen's banquet. I think my favourite moment in the book is probably the end of chapter 5, where Haman wants to hang Mordecai. because Mordecai hasn't been bowing down to him as Haman's been coming into the palace. And so Haman, our sort of almost pantomime villain figure, he builds a huge gallows outside his house. And it's just this wonderful moment. I think I heard someone say in a novel, if you introduce a gun into the book, it needs to have gone off within about 1 or 2 chapters. But why else would a gun appear unless it's going to be shot?
Yeah.
Why else would a gallows appear unless someone's going to be hanged on it? But we're thinking, okay, Haman wants to hang Mordecai on this. How's that going to work out? And so this gallows sort of literally and maybe metaphorically sort of overshadows what's coming. And I think it's just this will lead to a beautiful irony, because actually the king doesn't want to honor Haman, but Mordecai, who's discovered a plot against him. And so chapter 6, Mordecai gets exalted in front of Haman. I think reversals are a big theme in Esther. Such a godlike theme. Start of 1 Samuel, Hannah's prayer, the Lord brings down the proud, lifts up the humble. And so Haman expects to be honored, but Mordecai is. And maybe we sort of start to get a little hint that maybe with this gallows as well, it maybe won't go the way that Haman wants.
So Esther's gone before the king. She could have died, but he holds out a scepter to her. She goes and touches it. She invites him over for a banquet. First night with Haman. Second night, she then says, I'm going to explain what's going to go on. And she says that the Jews are going to be killed, and she's one of them, and explains that Haman's responsible. Then there's this slightly, again, it's not completely clear what's going on, but it seems to be something like the king leaves and Haman tries to beg Esther to stop this whole thing. And potentially, again, it's maybe the Lord's sovereign timing that when the king then comes back, he thinks that Haman is attacking Esther, and then it's Haman who ends up on the gallows. And it's that moment where the reversal is kind of complete. Kind of however it happens, Haman's done for. There's a new edict, so these edicts can't be revoked. I don't know why, but anyway. So the Jews are able to defend themselves when the time comes for them to be destroyed. So there is hopefully enough that people would then be like, I'm not going to go and try and kill my local Jewish neighbours because they might defend themselves and that might end up taking me out too. It's just a bizarre finish, but the people are delivered. They are not crushed and taken completely out of the picture, but the one who is maybe trying to crush them is himself crushed, and serpent type figures of people trying to kill this line come to mind.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think this is a Genesis 3:15. Haman's a serpent type figure. Interesting, he's an Agagite. Agag was king of the Amalekites. And when God's people were coming out of Egypt, the Amalekites have already tried to wipe out the Jews. Saul battled against Agag and the Amalekites. So actually, his ancestry has already got a bit of wipe these people out. So this isn't just some personal grievance. It seems to be in the line of, this is presented as someone who is against God's people, a serpent figure who's trying. And interesting, there's trying to crush them, but in the end, he gets crushed. Isn't that the cross actually? That gallows, I hadn't seen that, but this gallows I'm going to set up and this will be my victory actually proves to be his downfall. Obviously with the cross it's different. It's not that it's Satan who ends up on the cross. It's even more of a reversal that Jesus on the cross itself will be Satan's downfall, not his victory, which is why we see God's sovereignty. As he said, Yahweh's name isn't mentioned in the book, the only Bible book that doesn't mention God, but actually we see God's promises being fulfilled, God's care for his people. We see great courage from Esther. Probably Esther makes it into children's Bibles as how girls can be brave and can slightly be sort of oversimplified. But there is certainly that in there. But I think under a bigger picture of even through awful, wicked, abusive human leaders, we're painted a picture of the leader we need, who'll be exactly the opposite of Xerxes. But also we're seeing God keeping his promises to crush evil. Genesis 12:1-3. I will bless you, God says to Abraham and his people, and those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I'll curse. And so I think it's all these things being played out, but the narrator just leaves us to work it all out. And so it's a beautiful piece of literature, because I think we need to sort of supply some of the interpretation, having read previous scripture.
I must drag us out of Esther and drop us into Daniel.
This is towards the beginning of the exile, about 100 years before Esther, exactly. Daniel's taken to Babylon, who were the first people to bring God's people into exile.
What should we have our eyes out for as we step into this interesting book that starts kind of maybe more familiar and then swiftly gets less familiar?
We've given key chapters as 1 to 7, which are probably the chapters that we know. They're the sort of the more story chapters. We've got fiery furnace, we've got lion's den. Latter half of the book is more sort of apocalyptic, these visions of the future, which particularly if we don't know sort of the probably most of us aren't versed in the history of the late Persian Empire and what followed. So it's harder to read. There's this sort of concentric structure which may help us. Things happen in pairs. We get Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego thrown into a fiery furnace, and then later Daniel thrown into the lion's den. We get visions in a couple of chapters, and maybe in the middle of it, sort of start at the sort of the key point.
Chapter 4, verses 34 and 35 say, "At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'"
We'll track back to the beginning of the story, but this sort of central thing is going to be this powerful king of Babylon saying God is actually the ultimate king. His kingdom will reign forever. And so really the story of Babylon is going to be a tale of kingdoms, a tale of who is in charge. And if we've got a sense of that, lots of the visions will have something of that to them. And so, as you said, Daniel and his friends were some of the first exiles taken to Babylon. The goal was to kind of assimilate them, gave them new name. Their names are Hebrew names that talk about Yahweh, the God of Israel. They're now given Babylonian names that mention the Babylonian gods. They're trained in the literature and culture of the Babylonians. The goal is to take the best of God's people and turn them into Babylonians, so that Israel can basically become this part of Babylon in a different way, in a sense, trying to wipe out God's people, but this time through assimilation, through compromise, not through the sword. Daniel and his friends are faithful. They first refuse the king's food. They don't want to defile themselves that way. God's with them. Some later episodes, fiery furnace, lion's den, where they sort of more obviously take a stand. But we also get quite a few dreams, and there's a couple of dreams that will help us as we think about this sort of tale of kingdoms. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of this 4-part statue. And it might be hard as we read it, but there's this head of gold, the chest of silver, the middle of bronze, the legs and feet of iron and clay. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, is told that he will be the head of gold. That represents him. But then after him will come another kingdom, slightly less glorious, silver chest. Then another kingdom, slightly less glorious. Then this final kingdom, this iron kingdom. And certainly, as we'll see later, there's good reasons to see those as the first. Nebuchadnezzar is Babylon. Then the next kingdom is Persia, the Medes and the Persians. They will actually come in chapter 5 and 6. They will arrive and take over. So that kingdom arrives in the book. The bronze is probably Greece, which came after the Persian kingdoms. Alexander the Great conquered the Persians, conquered Xerxes and that crowd. And then this iron kingdom, but which is fragmented and will at some point break up, is Rome. And more things later in the book to see that. So Daniel is sort of predicting this, or rather the Lord through the dream, explained by Daniel, is actually just predicting the future of kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But what will happen is, in the days of that final kingdom, this stone will come that will strike that kingdom, and this stone will become a mountain that fills the whole earth. That's chapter 2, verse 35. And so amazingly, repeatedly in the book of Daniel, we get in the days of this kingdom of iron, which that's Rome. Everyone sees that as Rome, and we'll see other reasons for that. In the days of that empire kingdom, a new kingdom will be set up that will actually fill the whole earth. And so wonderful pictures of faced with all these kingdoms, and actually as we read, they're ravenous beasts. They are not nice places to be. They're not nice kingdoms. In the face of those will come this greater kingdom. But something I hadn't seen until today, King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want any of this. 4-part statue, he says, no, I'm going to make my statue of myself. It's going to be all gold. In other words, the golden head. You know what? There are no other kingdoms. It's all gold. It's all me. And he tells people to bow down for it. I think he's saying, nothing. No one will follow me. I will endure forever. And that's where we get to the fiery furnace. Do you want to pick up with our friends Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego?
Yeah. Oh, what good eggs. They're amazing. And yeah, faced with a fiery furnace. And they are willing to say, nah, Yahweh, that's where I stand. Yeah. They don't bow down. He kind of gives them another chance. They're like, nope. And they get tied up and thrown into this fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar is in such a rage, his like face kind of crumples up, and the people taking them into the fiery furnace are burned up themselves. And it's like, this guy's on a power trip, he looks, and it's just got out of hand. And I mean, if it wasn't out of hand before. But anyway, suddenly we see this other figure in the fiery furnace with them. They're walking around, so their bonds are snapped and they are free. And then we get King Nebuchadnezzar saying, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? It's like, yeah. How many did we have? So he says this to his counselors, and then they reply, yeah, you know, that's right. And then he answers them, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. I mean, I don't know where he gets that from, but I'm like, intriguing. Do go on. And then he calls them out, and they come out, and they don't even smell of smoke. And yeah, bit of a turn up.
And yeah, Christians have seen a clear sort of, whether it's the pre-incarnate Christ. We're pointed to Christ he's with them in the fire. He's with his people in the fire. And again, this is in exile. Remember, these are the people who are far from God. So it seems. But when they're far from God, under a foreign king, and they're faithful, actually the Lord is not far from them, actually. It's a wonderful picture of care for his people. Moving quickly, we get more dreams in chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar dreams this great tree, and then the tree's going to be cut down, and he discovers that actually that's him. The Lord Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives them to whom he will. Nebuchadnezzar feels invincible, but no, the Lord has other plans. Nebuchadnezzar gets humbled and eats grass and turns almost into this animal. I think this might be the inspiration for The Emperor's New Groove, little Disney film reference, with this proud emperor who he turns into a llama in the literally turns into a llama in the Disney film. But apparently there's something of here this proud ruler brought low. And actually then in chapter 5 we get another ruler. We now get Belshazzar, who's Nebuchadnezzar's son. He himself gets humbled. He has this massive feast, and then the famous, I mean, probably everyone in our culture knows the writings on the wall. They might not know where it comes from, but it comes from here. He was having this huge feast. Suddenly writing appears on the wall. This writing is, Mene, mene, tekel parsin. You've been weighed in the balance. You've been found wanting. Your kingdom will be divided. And that very night, and it's great. You can read extra biblical sources that speak of this feast. That very night, the Medes and the Persians came, smashed everything up, and now Darius the Mede becomes king. And that's the end of the Babylonian Empire, and we now have the Persian Empire, which, as we said earlier, this is what was predicted. Head of gold, we're now moving to the chest of silver. This is God is working his purpose out. God is in charge, not all these incredibly powerful men, despite what they think.
And as we move into meeting Daniel and his lion's den moment, there's a little pink post-it note moment, because the king who was just killed was Belshazzar, not to be mixed up with Daniel's name that he's been given when he's in Babylon, which is Belteshazzar, which I found very confusing for a long time. So hopefully that has maybe cleared that up. And we get Darius the Mede, and Daniel is clearly doing well. So Daniel is being put forward to being set up over the whole kingdom. And it looks like people don't like him, and the only grounds they've got to do him in is his religious practice, which, again, I'm intrigued because I don't know that there was a requirement that he needed to pray 3 times a day or being seen to pray either. So he's now only supposed to pray to Darius, and kind of, it looks like, going on with the king's ego. But Daniel, it looks like, on his conscience, continues to pray, doesn't hide himself away, and worships Yahweh. And that gets him put in the lion's den. And I am struck by his character here. I feel that he could have reasoned and weaseled his way out of this. He didn't have to, I think. And the fact that he still does, but he just trusts God. He just trusts God. He gets chucked in the lion's den, but the mouths of the lions are closed. So he survives the night. And when the kind of seal is taken off and the stone is rolled away the next morning, he's still in there. And the king then gathers up everyone who was trying to get Daniel and puts them in the lion's den, and then the lions go for them. So it wasn't just the lions weren't hungry. But we get in verse 26 this amazing thing that's very similar to what we had from Nebuchadnezzar. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. So again, we see this king getting that Yahweh is the one. We then jump into Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts. So here goes, folks, with some of the more crazier stuff. But we do get this amazing couple of verses, verse 13 and 14, that might be familiar to folks. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Yeah, this wonderful vision, and sort of in a perplexing set of chapters. For our sort of pink post note, who are the characters? We get this one looking like a son of man, which at this point could just be a mortal, a human being, but one looking like a son of man comes to the Ancient of Days. That's a picture for God. Comes with the clouds, is presented, and this son of man is given glory and a kingdom over all peoples. And now it's not God whose kingdom is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. It seems to be this Son of Man's kingdom will be like the same language that's been used of God consistently. And so we get this picture that actually read on, and it's in the time of this 4th beast. And just as the statue had 4 parts, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, there's now these 4 beasts: the lion, the eagle, that's Babylon; the bear is probably Persia; the leopard, Greece, Alexander the Great was known for his swift movement, he's the leopard. And then this 4th and terrifying, powerful beast, Rome. In the days of that kingdom, a son of man, will come and will be given authority and power over all of them. Remember that mountain that will sort of break this kingdom and rise to become a kingdom that spreads through the earth. This is where we get the Son of Man language that Jesus will use as his favourite title for himself in the New Testament. Interesting, I think probably when Jesus uses that language of himself, people didn't really get it. They haven't kind of put it together with this bit of Daniel, so it wasn't always understood. But actually what we're getting here is a very clear prediction. 4 kingdoms in the time of the last one, that in the time of the Roman kingdom, God will establish his kingdom over all these kingdoms. We go into chapters 8 and 9, and we get really a continuation of this vision of the ram and the goat, other pictures probably of Greece and Persia. We sort of start to get looking forward even to the real future, and it starts to get more and more apocalyptic. But I think I like Jim Hamilton's comment on these chapters. Even if we don't get all the times and dates and places, and again my kind of ancient Persian history isn't good enough necessarily to recognize. Actually, when you look into it, there's loads of details here that do correspond to what happens. This goat will be replaced by 4 little horns. We might think, what's that all about? Until we realize that Alexander the Great, the goat, did get replaced by 4 generals who, well before this was predicted. So this does match up with history. But the point Jim Hamilton says is the main function of these visions is to comfort the people of God with the knowledge that God is in sovereign control over what takes place. Indeed, he's directing events to their intended outcome. So some bits are clear. A Son of Man will come, will be given authority, his kingdom will be set up and will endure forever. There's then a whole lot of other historical details around it. It might take us a while to piece together, but I think we can see, even when God's people are in exile, even when they're under pretty brutal regimes, God is faithful. God is with them. God is working out all of history. He is sovereign over even Babylon, Persia, ancient Greece, ancient Rome. I mean, we've heard of lots of these places. These are big, powerful kingdoms. But there's another kingdom, the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ that, well, Babylon's gone, Persia's gone, ancient Greece, wonderful though it was, is gone. Rome lasted quite a long time, but the Roman Empire has gone. But Christ's kingdom continues to grow. That mountain is, even today, filling the whole earth. So lots that's perplexing in Daniel, but I think there's this great note of reassurance to God's people. The Lord is sovereign over all the kings of the earth. Wherever we find ourselves, whatever ruler, oppressive or not, we are under, there is one who sits above, who determines all things, who keeps his people safe, and who is building Christ's kingdom. And so we can look forward with hope.
Oh, whew, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm so glad. I want to barge on in with my Monday morning moment because I've got one. I am really struck by. I've never looked at Daniel and Esther at the same time together, so it's just interesting to put these books side to side. And I'm really struck by the character of both Daniel and Esther, and by their willingness to not try and control things themselves. In that, whether that's Esther saying, if I perish, I perish, or Daniel being like, I'm going to get chucked into the fire furnace. Yeah, might die, probably will. Lion's Den, same. They weren't trying to manipulate things for their good. That I just think I can just fall into that so much that if I just do that, or if I just lean this way, or I don't say that, or I just try and weasel things around, but actually just an honest, faithful trust in Yahweh. And just therefore being like, he's in control and I don't need to be. I think something we said way back, we don't need to be the one who knows all things, but we need to trust the one who does. Not that it's always going to work out in the way that we think it should or could, but actually how much better it is to trust Yahweh and to enjoy trusting him and to step out in faith, to be bold, to be courageous, to be willing to do hard things, to be willing to be misunderstood, to be willing in these instances to die. It's a very far cry from me as a white middle class Londoner. What about you?
I think sort of the hiddenness of God. In Esther, God's not mentioned at all. In Daniel, at times it feels that they're far from God and God might not be seen. It reminds me of the Joseph story, actually, where God disappears from the narrative for quite a long portion. And from the human point of view, you must be thinking, what on earth is God doing? But actually, they could trust God because of what they knew about God and his character and his promises. They could trust him. And Esther and Daniel and others exhibit such faith. But I think because they really know who God is, they know that God. And they know that just because I can't see what he's doing right now doesn't mean he's not doing things. And so I think it's encouraged me just to, I guess what you're saying, not to feel the need to understand all things, but to know that even when I can't see it, God is working things out. Even when sometimes it's in bizarre ways, as we see in some, this whole story of Esther is just weird and unlikely at every moment. Yet that's what God uses to save his people. God isn't taken by surprise, which is really reassuring.
We are going to be back again with Ezra and Nehemiah with our key chapters, Ezra 1-3, Nehemiah 1-3, and 12 and 13 with thebibleoverbrew.com. Having questions, notes, those numbers again. Thank you, Good News Broadcasting Association, for making this recording possible. Take care. God bless. Goodbye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Bible recap. I've literally just listened to that.
I'm Tara Lee Cobble. Hey, Bible readers.
Goodness, that's so funny. I knew it was going to happen at some point, but here we go.